What's going on, y'all? I want to ask y'all something. Why is it that the law moves in slow motion for Donald Trump? Because sometimes I sit and watch the news looking at this system, and to be honest, I'm still ashamed that America has reelected a convicted felon. And I know I've said that a million times before, but I really thought that all this shit was going to be behind us and Trump will be in jail because I could still feel that shock and disbelief when this man got back in office. And this was all because of Merrick Garland moving too slow, which is why Trump got away with so many crimes and has never really been held accountable for. And we could talk about the Epstein files too, the information that still hasn't been fully released because it feels like the justice system is covering for him. And it's frustrating to feel like the rules only apply to some people. Like, I'm seeing names of these elites coming out, seeing guys like Howard Lutnick getting questioned, but it feels like the one person at the very top, Donald Trump, is still avoiding any real accountability. He's not suffering any consequences. He just told us that he didn't give a shit about Americans' financial situation, and he suffered no consequences for it. And I truly believe he's going to flat out and say something inappropriate about young underage girls and not suffer any consequences for it. And it's like the system is moving too slow for the powerful. And they was trying to link Barack Obama to this mess not too long ago. But let's be for real for a second. They would never ever find Barack Obama in those files because first off, the math just don't add up. This dude was a community organizer in Chicago back in the 90s who couldn't even get a seat at the table, let alone a seat on a private jet to a billionaire's island. And if there was a single receipt, a single flight log, or even a grainy photo of Obama anywhere near that island, it wouldn't just be on the file. It would be on every billboard in America. Obama ain't in those files because this brother has class and dignity. And for a black man to reach that White House, he has to be perfect just to be considered equal. He knew the system was waiting for him to screw up, and he didn't have the luxury of being reckless or curious about a billionaire like Epstein. And for Obama, dignity wasn't just a choice, it was his armor. They wanted to drag Obama, a black man, into this shit to distract us from the white elites who were actually running the system. And while the media was arguing over Michael Jackson, a pop star who had been gone for damn near 20 years, they was trying to bury the foul 468 photos that the DOJ tried to delete. The real threat ain't outside, it's at the very top. And that's why I find myself going back to the show To Catch a Predator. And for those who don't know the show, it was a series that used to come on MSNBC back in the day, exposing men getting caught in sting operations, trying to meet up with minors. They eventually canceled it because of that Lewis Conrad situation. But they do have a new version of the show called Takedown on the True Blue Network with Chris Hansen still hosting it. But personally, I like To Catch a Predator better because the show felt more authentic. Plus, it was funny as shit just seeing him get busted. And the other reason I go back to it is because on that show, the big guy didn't get a pass. And I feel that this show gave us the raw, uncut truth of the suburbs, along with the hood and foreigners alike, all in the same hour. Because you may see a brother from the city who thought he was street smart walking into that kitchen, and 10 minutes later, you see a white collar executive who thought his status made him untouchable. Because I think about that doctor, Maurice Wolin, who eventually committed suicide years later after this sting, actually on the same day as the January 6th riots. But here he was, this wealthy, successful dude with a great career, walking in that patio, following this decoy in the backyard, thinking he was untouchable. And within minutes later, he was confronted by police and was being handcuffed in that garage. And I mean, that show is the only place where the playing field was actual level. Status and race didn't mean shit on that show because it didn't matter if you were a white doctor like Maurice Wolin or a black minister like Marvin Harrison Smith or a Hispanic staff sergeant like Rolando Resticruz. Nobody got a pass. It stripped away the respectability of politics for everybody. And in that kitchen, everyone was just a human caught in the trap of their own making. And I believe that it's a deep psychological issue that these guys were going through because it makes you wonder, what would a 40-year-old man want to do with a 13-year-old girl? And personally, I think it's all about wanting to be in control. Since the majority of adult women are not virgins, they want to take advantage of a child who's not experienced. And a lot of these men were married with kids and had respectable careers, but sometimes when people get everything they want, they get bored and just get a thrill of doing something wrong and not get caught. You know, they think their status makes them untouchable. Just like Michael Patterson from the Bowling Green sting. He was so obsessed with power that he lied to the decoy, bragging that he was a detective lieutenant just to feel important. And even though he had already been fired from being a reserve cop for impersonating an on-duty officer, he thought that pretending to have that status and authority protected him, and that's what fucked him up at the end. All that tough guy detective energy disappeared the second the real cops ambushed him, to where he's running back in that house, getting tased, screaming like a little bitch, screaming like a fucking cartoon character while being tackled and dragged by those cops on the floor. But these predators knew what they were getting into, as soon as they started speaking to these decoys. Because the signs are always there from day one, but they choose not to see them because they get online and talk to these decoys. You could tell they're decoys because they're so clean. Just like with these female undercover cops who go as prostitutes. I mean, you could just tell that they're cops because, for example, do you really think a white woman is going to go down to the hood and give some brothers some ass? Be for real. But these predators know, and they get suspicious. Like, they tend to have this gut feeling that something's up, but they still go along with it anyway. And a lot of them, they seem nervous and paranoid when they walk in. Just like that one dude, the one who eventually died not too long after the sting, Ernest Timmons, who was this tech sergeant in the U.S. Air Force. Now think about that. He was about to go to Iraq to serve the country, but instead of focusing on his mission, he was focusing on a chat room on what he thought was a 13-year-old girl. He comes to that house and tells a decoy, hey, let's go upstairs. Then Chris Hansen comes out. We see Ernest getting scared. He's sitting there sweating bullets, completely soaking through his clothes while his eyes are bulging out, telling Chris, I'm not telling you a lie, sir. He came up with this bullshit excuse saying he was only there because of his friend Kevin from the base. And I believe he had a camera with him too, and he was going to take pictures of the decoy. But that shit was hilarious because it was so obvious that he was lying, because it was like, you drove all that way, risking your whole military career, ruining your whole life for Kevin. You out here doing predatory errands like it's a DoorDash order. I mean, the shit just don't make any sense. And he's baffled, telling Chris, I don't know, sir. I'm just as stunned as you. And Chris Hansen was like, no, motherfucker, you stunned because you got caught. That's what it is. And like I said, that's the funniest part about dudes like that, is that tough guy facade always disappears. You see his sir, yes, sir, discipline turn into sir, please, sir, in 10 seconds, crying just like that Staff Sergeant Rolando Resacruz did, dropping down on his knees crying, please, sir, please. They went from these respectable men serving the military to these terrified predators crying and sobbing, begging not to go to jail. They knew their military career, their freedom, and their entire life was evaporating in real time on national TV. And I mean, that military discipline goes straight out the window the second the cameras start rolling. And look, we ain't got to talk about a reality TV show from 20 years ago to see that this shit is happening, because it's still happening right now all across the nation. It's happening in schools, and we see it all the time on the news. Like, there was this golf coach at the school district, a man that parents trusted with their kids. But just last week, he got arrested for doing something that was completely out of line. Now, I don't want to get too graphic, but he was doing some indecent things right out in the open at a park, a place where families go all the time. And as soon as his picture hit social media, the whole community saw it and gave the police his name, and he was fired immediately. But see, it's bigger than just one coach. Look at the systemic failures we got in our local schools, where we've seen some horrific situations of staff members harming the kids they were supposed to be protecting. There was this story that came out where there was this special needs teacher who was abusing, not sexually abusing, but abusing this nonverbal autistic black boy, a kid who couldn't even speak up to tell his mama what was going on. And on top of the physical mistreatment, this son of a bitch was caught on audio whispering vile, hateful racial slurs directly to this helpless little boy trapped in that classroom environment, a child who couldn't even voice what was happening to him. And when you see the school district moving too slow to fix a toxic environment like that, it's almost like the exact same protection we see at the top. They protect the institution, they protect the brand, and they try to flip the script by falsifying reports until a hidden camera exposes the truth and forces their hand. Because, I mean, our local school system got some deep toxic issues. We're seeing predatory behavior and hateful mindsets running rapid, but at the very least, I'm glad to see that these dudes are finally being forced to face the music. They need to be held accountable the same exact way those predators were on the show, because we can't let these monsters like that roam around free in our communities where they can target more kids. No, let these nasty, perverted individuals see their whole lives flash in front of their eyes so they can realize that their career, their retirement, and their reputation are all vanishing in a matter of seconds. Nobody's going to look at them the same way. Everybody that knows them and interacted with them are going to be thinking, damn, I didn't know he was like that. We hung out. I've invited this man to my house. He's been around my kids. Their life ain't going to be the same after that. They're going to be charged. They're going to be sentenced to prison. And they're going to have to face the harshest reality possible because even other prisoners hate and despise predatory offenders more than anybody else. And on top of that, when they get out of prison, they got to live the rest of their lives as a RSO, if you know what that means. And that's the way it should be, because they got to be a monster to do a crime as heinous as this and not feel no remorse afterwards. Because just like the show To Catch a Predator, what if they took it a step further? What if there was an actual child there and they did what they wanted to do with them and got away with it? How could they come home and look at their wives and kids after doing some shit like that? And that's why I feel those sting operations on that show really made things safer, because it exposed those guys for who they really were. And a lot of these men don't always look or seem like the type that would do these things, but regardless if they were from the suburbs or the hood, or if they were foreigners from across the world, this stuff proves that cold-blooded behavior lives in everybody. It shows that whether you're driving a beat-up sedan or a luxury SUV, the cops in the system are going to treat you the exact same way. And that's why I respected the hustle of the show To Catch a Predator, because when those men got caught for meeting minors, it didn't give out passes to the suburbs. It didn't pass on individuals just because of where they came from. It just gave us the facts. And it reminded us that at the end of the day, the law shouldn't care what zip code you're in or what nation you were born in. So keep your perspective sharp. Don't look at where they came from. Look at what they were doing, because the truth is the only thing that stays balanced. Peace.